At a family dinner, my in-laws publicly shamed me for not following their holiday customs. My husband sighed and said, "You should try harder to fit in." I quietly placed a book on the table and said, "That's funny. Because your grandmother did the same thing as me." When I showed them the proof, they fell silent. Let me start by saying that my in-laws are obsessed with their traditions. Not in a sweet, nostalgic way, more like a militant, unspoken rules that you just somehow know kind of way. I married into the Preston family 8 years ago. They're an old money family from Boston who act like their last name should be engraved on a monument somewhere. They drop phrases like, "Well, that's just how things are done in this family," like it's the law. I grew up in Pittsburgh, where Christmas meant homemade cookies, mismatched pajamas, and a house full of loud laughter and football playing in the background. The Prestons? Their Christmas is a formal event. 7 p.m. sharp dinner. If you're late, they lock the doors. Every woman wears pearls, yes, even the toddlers. Men carve the goose, women serve dessert. No personal gifts, only donations to the family's legacy projects. Every guest must give a speech about what the Prestons mean to them. I tried for years. I really did. I wore the pearls. I sat through their speeches. I nodded along when they boasted about their generations of refined values. But this year, I just couldn't do it anymore. We arrived at Daniel's parents' house, a massive estate in Cambridge that looks like a museum nobody actually enjoys. The kind of place with a drawing room and a grand staircase that nobody is allowed to use. Dinner started, and as usual, I felt like an outsider at my own family's holiday. The men talked about important matters at one end of the table, while the women discussed social responsibilities. Everything was going fine until the speeches. One by one, each person stood and delivered their annual Preston speech. It was a parade of self-importance and delusion. Being a Preston means upholding the values of dignity and decorum. I am honored to carry the torch of our forefathers. The Preston name has always stood for excellence. You get the idea. When it was my turn, I stood, cleared my throat, and said, "I'm just grateful for good food and good company." Silence. Like, actual silence. You'd think I just announced I'd burned down a historical monument. Daniel's mother, Eleanor, set down her wine glass with the kind of deliberate slowness that tells you you're about to be put in your place. "That's all," she said, tilting her head. "Yes," I said. "That sums it up." Another pause. Then, Eleanor gave me that tight-lipped, rich people smile and said, "Well, it seems some of us don't take traditions seriously." Cue the murmurs. Daniel sighed, rubbed his temples, and muttered under his breath, "You should try harder to fit in." I saw red. I reached into my bag, pulled out a book, and calmly placed it on the table. "That's funny," I said. "Because your grandmother didn't follow these traditions either." Dead silence. A month before Christmas, I found an old family journal while helping Daniel's grandmother, Margaret, clean out her attic. It belonged to Margaret Preston herself. She was the matriarch before Eleanor. Inside, she wrote about how she hated these very same traditions. She wrote about how she was pressured into silence. About how she never felt at home in this family because of these ridiculous expectations. One entry, dated Christmas 1948, stood out. "I refuse to let my husband dictate my role in this family. Christmas is about love, not a rigid schedule. If they cannot accept me as I am, then they do not deserve me at all." Margaret Preston was me. I highlighted that exact passage and bookmarked the page. When Eleanor saw the journal, her face lost all color. Richard, Daniel's father, snatched the book off the table like it was a crime scene report. "Where did you get this?" he snapped. "From your mother's attic," I said. "She gave it to me." Sophie, Daniel's younger sister, grabbed it next. "Holy SHT, asterisk," she muttered as she read the pages. Then she laughed. Laughed. Eleanor was furious. "This is a violation of our family's private history," she hissed. I shrugged. It's the truth. Daniel just stared at his plate, looking like he wanted the ground to swallow him. Other family members started flipping through the journal. Suddenly, the unshakable Preston traditions were looking a lot shakier. Then, Sophie stood up. She unfastened her pearl earrings, set them down on the table, and said, "Well, I guess I don't need these anymore." Chaos. Absolute chaos. Eleanor stormed out. Richard demanded the journal be returned to the family archives. Daniel refused to look at me. Sophie was laughing so hard she was crying. After a few minutes of arguing, I stood up, grabbed my purse, and said, "Merry Christmas, everyone. Enjoy your speeches." Then I walked out. I haven't spoken to Eleanor or Richard since that night. Daniel and I drove home in total silence. He hasn't said much about it, except for one thing. I didn't know she felt that way. I shrugged. Now you do. A few days later, Sophie texted me a picture of her wearing jeans at the Preston estate. The caption? "The revolution has begun." It didn't take long for the fallout to hit. 2 days after Christmas, Daniel's father, Richard, called him. I wasn't in the room, but I could hear every word through the thin walls of our apartment. You need to get that book back. Daniel didn't say anything. Do you hear me, son? That book belongs to this family. We have a certain reputation to uphold. I walked into the room just in time to hear Daniel let out a tired sigh. Dad, it's a journal. It's not some classified document. Richard's voice dropped into that rich people whisper that means I'm about to threaten you, but politely. That book will destroy this family's legacy if it falls into the wrong hands. At that, I snorted. Destroy the legacy? A 75-year-old journal was going to take down the entire Preston dynasty? Daniel ran a hand over his face, clearly exhausted. Dad, I have to go. Before Richard could argue, Daniel hung up. Over the next few days, things got weird. Sophie was still laughing about the whole thing. She texted me updates from the Preston estate, saying Eleanor was acting like she'd been personally attacked by the ghost of Christmas past. Daniel was quieter than usual. He wasn't mad at me, exactly, but he was caught in the middle. Eleanor sent me an email. It was short. Hannah, we need to have a conversation. Come by the house this Saturday. Eleanor, no pleasantries. No, hope you're well. Just a demand. I stared at it for a long time before replying. Eleanor, if you want to talk, we can do it at my place. Hannah, she didn't respond. Then, things escalated. That Friday, Daniel and I went out for dinner. When we got home, there was an envelope taped to our front door. It was thick, cream-colored paper with the Preston family crest. Inside was a formal letter from a lawyer. On behalf of the Preston family, we formally request the return of all written historical documents pertaining to the Preston lineage. They were threatening legal action over a freaking journal. Daniel sat down hard on the couch, rubbing his temples. Jesus Christ, they're serious. I tossed the letter onto the coffee table. What are they going to do, sue me? It's a handwritten diary from 1948. They don't own history. Daniel didn't say anything. His silence bothered me. Tell me you don't agree with them, I said. He let out a breath. I don't know what I think, Hannah. I just know my parents don't let things go. That much was obvious. I crossed my arms. They're treating this like it's a scandal. Like I published some deep, dark secret. But all I did was show that their traditions aren't as old as they pretend they are. Daniel didn't argue. But he also didn't defend me. And that's when I realized something. This wasn't just about a journal. This was about control. 2 days later, Eleanor showed up at our apartment unannounced. She didn't knock. She buzzed our intercom until we let her in. When I opened the door, she was standing there in a perfectly pressed beige coat, looking every bit like she was about to fire me from a job I didn't even have. Daniel was standing behind me, tense. Hannah, she said smoothly. We need to talk. I stepped aside, letting her in. But the second she was inside, she turned to Daniel. Daniel, sweetheart, why don't you go get us some tea? Daniel hesitated. He glanced at me. I gave him a look that said, don't you dare leave me alone with her. I'm fine, I said. Just say what you came here to say. Eleanor folded her hands in front of her. I'm asking you one last time, as a courtesy, to return that journal. I stared at her. And if I don't? She smiled. But it wasn't kind. It was the kind of smile that came right before something awful. Then I'm afraid we'll have to take steps to protect our family's reputation. I felt Daniel tense beside me. Are you seriously threatening me? I asked. Of course not, dear, she said, tilting her head. I'm simply warning you. This could get complicated. I laughed. Complicated? Eleanor, this isn't a murder trial. It's a Christmas diary from 1948. What exactly are you trying to protect? She kept that tight smile. The integrity of our family. Something you don't seem to respect. That's when I realized what she was doing. This wasn't about the journal. It was about breaking me down. She wanted me to submit. She wanted me to feel like an outsider who had to earn my place. I wasn't playing that game. I took a slow step toward her and said, Tell me something, Eleanor. Who do you think has more power here? Me? Or you? Her eyes flickered for half a second, so fast I almost missed it. She knew. She knew that for the first time in her life, she wasn't the one in control. I folded my arms. You can send your lawyers. You can send your threats. But I'm not giving you that journal. And if you push me, I'll make sure it's read by every single person in this family. Her nostrils flared. She knew I meant it. Without another word, she turned on her heel and walked toward the door. But before she left, she paused. You think you've won something, don't you? She said, voice cold. I didn't answer. She gave me one last long look, then walked out. The second the door shut, Daniel let out a breath like he'd been holding it in for hours. Jesus, Hannah. I turned to him. She's not going to let this go, I said. Something's coming. Daniel rubbed his face. Yeah. I know. For the first time, he looked genuinely worried. I don't know what Eleanor's next move is, but I know one thing. This isn't over. For a few days, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Eleanor had backed off. No more calls, no more emails, no more legal threats. But I knew better. Silence wasn't surrender. Silence meant she was planning something. Then it happened. I got a call from Daniel while I was out grocery shopping. Hannah, you need to get home. Now. His voice sounded off. Tight. Like something was really wrong. I abandoned my cart and rushed home. When I walked through the door, Daniel was standing in the living room, holding an envelope. Not just any envelope. A letter from his grandmother. The letter was old. The paper was yellowed at the edges, the handwriting careful and elegant. Daniel handed it to me without a word. I unfolded it and started reading. Dearest Daniel, if you are reading this, it means my time has passed, and there are things you must know. You have likely grown up believing that the Preston name is built on tradition, honor, and respect. But I want you to understand the truth. This family was built on control, not love. I never belonged. I was never meant to belong. And if you married a woman who feels the same way, I beg you, do not let them change her. Do not let them break her the way they broke me. Love her. Protect her. And most of all, stand by her when the time comes. Because they will try to destroy her. The words blurred as my hands started shaking. Daniel sat down on the couch, rubbing his face. She knew, he muttered. She knew this would happen. I exhaled. Margaret had warned him. She had seen it coming. And now, Eleanor was following the same playbook that had been used against her. The next day, Sophie called me. Did Daniel tell you? She asked. Tell me what? She hesitated. You guys should check your bank account. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my phone, logged into our joint account and froze. Our savings account was empty. All of it, gone. Daniel was looking over my shoulder. What the hell? He said, voice sharp. Then, another realization hit me. We had a secondary trust fund tied to his family. We barely touched it, but it was completely drained. Daniel's face went white. He pulled out his phone, dialed his father's number, and put it on speaker. Richard picked up on the second ring. Son. I was expecting your call. Daniel's hands curled into fists. What did you do? Richard's voice was calm. Too calm. You forced our hand, Daniel. You knew the terms of that trust. It remains in your name only if you uphold the values of this family. Clearly, you've made your choice. I clenched my teeth. This was punishment. Eleanor had lost control over me. So Richard went after Daniel. Daniel's voice was tight. You stole from us. Richard laughed. You disappoint me, son. We didn't steal. You forfeited it. You broke the agreement. I looked at Daniel. He was shaking with anger. So this is what it's about, he snapped. You're trying to make us crawl back? There was a pause. Then Richard said, It's not too late, Daniel. Bring Hannah back in line and we'll fix this. I held my breath, waiting for Daniel to speak. This was his moment. This was when he had to choose. Daniel took a slow breath. When he finally spoke, his voice was clear. Go to hell, Dad. Then he hung up. That night, we sat in the dark living room, processing. We had lost thousands of dollars. Years of savings, gone. I should have been panicked. But instead, I felt something else. Relief. Because Daniel had finally seen them for what they were. We weren't going back. But I also knew one thing for sure. Eleanor wasn't done. And I was going to be ready. The money was gone. Daniel's family had stripped our trust fund, erased our savings, and all but excommunicated us from their version of a perfect life. And yet, despite everything, I knew one thing. Eleanor wasn't done. She hadn't gotten what she wanted. She hadn't broken me. And people like Eleanor never accept defeat. 2 weeks later, the invitation arrived. A hand-delivered envelope, thick ivory paper, gold embossed lettering. Classic Preston style. Daniel and Hannah, you are formally invited to a family gathering at the Preston estate this Saturday. Given recent events, it is time to discuss the future and put misunderstandings behind us. Attendance is expected. Eleanor and Richard Preston. Daniel read it over my shoulder. Attendance is expected, he muttered. Yeah, that sounds like a trap. I exhaled. Yeah, but we're going. Daniel turned to me. Why? I met his eyes. Because Eleanor wants control. And I want to watch her lose it. We arrived at the estate on Saturday evening. The whole Preston family was there. Aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone Eleanor could gather as an audience. Sophie was there, too. She caught my eye from across the room and gave me a tiny, knowing smirk. Dinner was a tense, fake politeness affair. Eleanor, dressed in her usual beige perfection, barely looked at me as the meal dragged on. Then, as the last plates were cleared, she stood. And just like that, the trap was sprung. Eleanor folded her hands and smiled. Now that we are all together, I think it's time we address the recent tension in our family. She turned to me, voice smooth as silk. Hannah, dear, I must admit, I've been hurt by your recent behavior. I said nothing. You've misrepresented this family's traditions. You've misunderstood our intentions. And in doing so, you have created division where there should be unity. Daniel scoffed. Misrepresented? You threatened us, Mom. You drained our accounts. Eleanor barely glanced at him. That money belonged to the family, Daniel. And family loyalty is a privilege, one that must be earned. My hands curled into fists. Daniel let out a sharp, humorless laugh. So that's what this is? A loyalty test. Eleanor finally turned to fully face him. It's about knowing where you belong, Daniel. And then, Richard stood up. We are willing to offer a solution, he said, smooth as ever. A way forward. I already knew what was coming. Hannah, if you are willing to formally apologize, publicly, here and now, for the disruption you've caused, we will reconsider restoring the trust. There it was. A full-circle moment. They wanted me to submit. To stand up in front of this entire family and accept blame for defending myself. To crawl back. I stared at them. Then I stood. Slowly. An apology? I said. For what, exactly? Eleanor tilted her head. For your disrespect. I laughed. Laughed. Disrespect? You mean exposing the truth? The truth that your own matriarch rejected all of this nonsense. I turned to look at the rest of the family. Has anyone actually read Margaret's journal? No one answered. Of course they hadn't. Eleanor and Richard had made sure of that. So I pulled out the book. Right there at the dinner table. I set it down. The room went dead silent. Margaret hated this, I said, voice clear. She spent her entire life suffocating under your rules. And now, you're trying to do the same thing to me. Eleanor's perfect mask cracked. You do not speak for my mother, she snapped. I tapped the journal. She speaks for herself. I opened to the highlighted passage and began to read. I refuse to let my husband dictate my role in this family. Christmas is about love, not a rigid schedule. If they cannot accept me as I am, then they do not deserve me at all. Eleanor's face twisted. Enough, she snapped. But it wasn't enough. Sophie suddenly stood up. Holy SHT, asterisk, she said, eyes wide. Grandma was one of us. Then, she turned to her parents. You've been lying to us for years. The entire room shifted. Murmurs. Confused glances. Cracks in the foundation. Eleanor clenched her fists. This is irrelevant. My mother was confused in her old age. You are all misunderstanding, Daniel cut her off. Stop it, Mom. You're caught. Eleanor's breathing sharpened. For the first time, she looked afraid. I turned to Richard. So tell me, do I still owe you an apology? His jaw tightened. Watch yourself, Hannah. I smirked. Or what? You'll cut us off? Oh, wait, you already did. The weight of it all settled. The family was turning. The lie was crumbling. Eleanor's eyes burned into mine. She knew. She had lost. She grabbed Richard's arm and whispered something under her breath. Then, without another word, they both left the room. A Preston retreat. The room buzzed. Daniel exhaled, rubbing his face. Jesus Christ, he muttered. Sophie plopped down beside me, grinning. That was the single greatest thing I've ever seen. Daniel looked at me, expression unreadable. We just burned the last bridge, didn't we? I took his hand. No, I said. We built a new one. We left that night free. No more forced traditions. No more pearls. No more speeches. We didn't get our money back. But we didn't need it. Because for the first time since I married into this family, I finally won. And next Christmas? We'd be celebrating in pajamas.